By penetrating personality, you mean seeing through personality?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, because most of the time people are identified with what I call that dream. And as long as you're identified with it, that's what you live.
Hmm.
So what happens in these groups, and I've observed this now for a year with my other group, is the focus is very different than in the world, because here we're doing the opposite of what happens in the world. In the world, the personality is supported because there is a consensus out there that this is who we are. And here it's the inverse of that. So to the part of you that has perhaps brought you here, that has that yearning and has had those experiences, this is the direction to go to find that. And this is what we're supporting. Whereas you may find in the world the opposite, that people won't want to hear about your crazy mystical experiences or these weird thoughts you're having that don't fit with the group personality out there. So that's the function of this. It's a place where this, which is obviously in you, is supported in many different ways by what I say, what other people in the group say, by what we discuss, what you share in the messenger group, whatever. That's how this works.
What struck me about your book, The Infinite Journey, is your ability to express difficult to explain concepts, difficult
Yeah.
to conceptualize awareness. And I think you express it very with ease.
Thank you. So my background, I'll tell you a little bit about me if you don't know, is I've spent 35 plus years creating children's picture books. That's been my job. So I'm a kind of writer and a illustrator. And in a way, that job involves a similar thing, which is the breaking down of information into easily digestible nuggets for, in that case, children. So you're kind of showing them how the world is and how feelings are, for example, with young kids. These are picture books, they're very young. And their minds can only take so much, and it has to be in a form that is clear and fun and touching and all these things. So in a way, I feel in some ways it was good training. I enjoy communicating this. You know, some people say you can't understand, you don't understand. Well, when it comes to the absolute, I totally agree. You can't understand it. You'll never understand it. That's the way it is. But there is, and I talk about this in the first book, there are things that you can understand in the relative level as you go towards the absolute. There's a level where you can understand. And my conviction from my experience is that you almost like need to understand it to be able to help you to find this. You can have free gifts, but in order to sort of really kind of stabilize in this, there's a certain level of understanding that happens. So I think that's what my books were. It was a kind of laying out of what I'd found. And I was very clear that I wanted it to be as clear as possible, hence the dictionary at the back, the glossary. But the order in which I make those points and do those steps is very kind of orderly. This leads to that. And once you know that, okay, so in a children's picture book or in a story, if you've got A, B, C, these sort of facts are given that add up to a story. But if you go from A to C and you miss B, C doesn't make any sense because you've missed a bit of information in the trail. So this is what I've really applied to those books. I was very aware that there's no point in talking about this until you've covered what that means and what you mean by that. So that very much led me to how to lay the whole thing out. Yeah.
I'm here looking for a better way to be. You know, being is what we're doing, and I'm looking for a better way to be. How to be in my own fullness, you know,
Yeah.
without the fears of the ego and all that kind of thing. A better way to be, I would say,
Yeah.
put it in a nutshell.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm
Other
talking about.
people might be doing that as well.
Mm. That's what I'm talking about, really. I mean, to translate it into my terms, so if one is identified with personality, one lives the dream of personality, and with that comes the suffering of personality, which is, the neurosis and the worry and the fear and the future orientation or the past orientation, all of that. So without that, what I'm suggesting here is there is a way to live beyond all that, hence beyond personality. It doesn't mean one is not human in any way, and one doesn't have a self, or one has the appearance of being separate. That's all part of this show, obviously. I think anyone who is alive should be able to see that. Now, some paths kind of seem to deny that, and that's not really where I come from at all.
A better way to be, then. Is that what you're offering?
Well, yeah, okay. Am I offering it? I mean, I can't give it to you. I'm pointing the way for you to find that. And what else should it be? If I could give it to you, it wouldn't really help you, because it would be an experience and then it would pass. It wouldn't really be yours.
Maybe you might help me discover it.
Absolutely. That's the best that can happen here. I'm pointing towards it. If you open to what I'm saying, as far as I'm concerned, you are opening to this experience in you.
I had a very peak spiritual experience once in which I was filled with light. It didn't last long, and it had effects that lasted for 2 or 3 weeks. I gradually got back into ego struggle in the world. But
Yeah.
I did get filled with light once.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
And it's something that you can never forget, and I can still remember the truth and the bliss that I felt.
Yeah. Yes, so I would call that an opening.
Yes.
So the way I talk about these things is like there's a kind of different levels of this. So there's openings, and then you've got awakenings. So openings are usually shortish, an hour long, few hours or a few days at most, maybe. And then it wears off. And then you've got awakenings. Now, awakenings are much bigger, and you may be in it even for weeks or months, but it still ends. So the way I talk about it is the shift. So there's a big question of why it ends, but we can talk about that. And then what I call the shift is when the perception that happens there is kind of ongoing. Now, it doesn't mean you're blissed out all the time or in that peak state all the time, but the access to the being, to come back to that word, is not obstructed by personality in an ongoing way. So it's interesting. We've all, obviously everyone here, I'm pretty sure from what you said, has experienced openings and maybe awakenings. And of course, we experience these and we want more of it. And, I don't think it's just greed or desire. It's actually like I say, a yearning for something that's natural. How, as far as I'm concerned, how we came into this world. It's a very natural thing. But oddly, in the world, it's not recognized. And that's why it's important that people like us recognize it. Now, some people have openings, as far as I've found out, and they kind of almost push them into the subconscious, and they don't even realize they've had them because it's just not recognized in the general, a society out there. So here, like when I hear about your openings or awakenings, it's like they're, I won't say applauded, but they're given energy. Like I encourage you to go more in that direction. That's the direction we're going in, It's actually just removing anything, whatever's left that obscures that perception. People have awakenings and they see a lot, and it's true, and it's strong, and it's real. You know, it's all valid. But when you get to that stage where it passes, then the personality comes. So for me, it's not like another personality. The personality comes back in, and all the motivations of personality, which is to secure itself, to make itself solid and defend itself, it's almost like it was booted out for the length of that awakening or opening, and then it comes back in, and it actually uses what's happened to its own advantage. We've all seen spiritual personalities, I'm sure, and a lot of cases of abuse happen in that scenario. So it's not fully completed. It's, you know, if the personality is still coming in, it's still personality, and it's the same thing. It's just using very spiritual things to build its tower with and protect itself with. And it's a subtle thing, and it's confusing, because if you haven't seen through it, these people can say things that can be very powerful still, because what they've seen and their experience may be true, you know. So on one level, there's still that possibility you could still learn things from them. But there are certain tells, you know, like in poker, you have tells of if someone's lying. There are certain tells that you can become aware of that show that personality is still active and kind of running the show somewhere. And I would say any form of abuse is a very obvious one in a sort of spiritual personality. That's the first sign, you know, it's an obvious one. But there's other subtler ones.
Yeah.
Like if you're identified with personality, of course, that's the arena in which you work, and you can move the furniture around in that, and you can make an easier life to some extent. So, you know, psychotherapy has its place, but this is like a whole nother step. And that's where the mystery starts, really. So I talk about the stuff you can talk about to get to the place of the stuff that you can't talk about.
It's sometimes described as a big leap, isn't it?
Yeah,
because it seems to be a seeking truth, and it requires quite a big leap to step into something like we describe as truth.
It does seem like that, maybe from the personality and stuff, but as you all know from your openings or your experiences, it actually isn't. It's as close as, you know, it's like that. It's a millimeter to the left. You know what I mean? Because it is where we begin. So somewhere we know it. The way I put it is there is suffering in human life, and that's part of the deal of human life. But there is suffering that comes from personality and identification with it. And that doesn't have to be a part of human life. So that's the kind of suffering that comes from, I'm only going to feel good if I get this job. Or if enough people like my Facebook post, or I'm being crass, but you know what I mean. It's all under the heading of when I get this, I'll be happy. And there's many, many forms of that kind of suffering, but that is something that most people have. And beyond personality, that starts to fall away because you're orientated to something else that is not dependent on those things being fulfilled. You know, Freddie kind of very clearly outlined what happened, how his opening was disturbed by emotion, really, what I'll call emotion coming in. And emotion is the currency of personality. And as soon as that came in, you're pulled out of it. So what we're dealing is, it's like we're talking about the absolute, but we're kind of located in the relative to a large degree. So I talk about the finding there's a kind of harmonization that can happen. You know, you've experienced the absolute, which of course one way of talking about it is the now, you know, and then, you know, you go into your life and somebody insults you, you feel really upset, and you know, you lose it. So how does that relate to that? And I'm very much about the practicalities of that. So what is that happening there? Does that have to happen that you lose it? And I'm saying it doesn't.
Mm, mm.
Yeah. And I'm trying to lay out how that works, that it doesn't.
It is a gift to have a glimpse of the absolute.
Mm.
And on this relative level, it would seem that you're asking quite a lot to have too many gifts. This is the relative, isn't it?
Well, it's both, really, isn't it? I mean, I would say it's the absolute expressing as the relative.
Yeah, but there's not really that much awareness of the absolute, is there? It within the relative.
No. So what we're talking about is a kind of retuning of the radio where we are tuned to the absolute whilst in the relative.
Hmm.
And the practicalities of that, what does that mean?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I like that.
Mm.
It's like you can have the spiritual gift and have it happen much more than the glimpse that happened before.
Yeah. Now, so my story, right? I was blessed with those gifts when I was a teenager. And I talk about this in the first book. And when they came, it was so clear. And I was outside of the suffering of a normal teenage life. And they carried on kind of through to my early 30s, I think. And I was just put on this quest. Why do they pass? What's going on? Why do I lose them? So when they were happening, I would write and I would examine and investigate and do everything I could to try and understand what it was. And every time, of course, it passed again. So part of my journey, and I went to teachers later on and kind of asked that question, and nobody seemed to know. Nobody gave me an answer that I could. So I kind of had to find out for myself. And I did many, many years later. I'm not reliant on gifts. I don't have them anymore. I don't really have them anymore. I mean, I have slightly different, I don't want to call them states, but, you know, things change and you have moments where you're very blissful a bit or different. But in general, those things left because they're almost like not relevant because the setting is more tuned to the absolute. But the point is, whilst living a life in the relative, and that's the whole thing here. That's what we're talking about.
So, do you experience bliss?
Sometimes.
Yeah, because
Not always. No.
What I'm feeling now is that bliss is our natural state, and if only we can find a way of getting out of the way of the bliss.
Well, I think there are different manifestations of being a human, and there's different modes of experiencing this as well. So I would also say you could be so I've studied oriental medicine to an extent, so I'm going to use a term from that. There are times if I was walking down the street and somebody attacked me, I would be in touch with wood chi, what the Chinese would call wood chi, which is upright yang energy that would be needed and appropriate in that scenario. So you might say that's not going to be blissful, but it's still energy being lived, you know. So there's different, you know, there's different expressions of this. Sometimes I will be in stillness like Sean is now, and sometimes I will be doing this and using my mind, and sometimes I won't be. I'll leave this and I'll forget all about it. So there are different expressions of the shift because we're human and we live in this, you know, relative reality, and they're all good, you know, they're all good, but they're not defined by that personality. You know, I had a personality that I thought I was. I'm not defined by that. Therefore, I don't ongoing suffer the results of that. You know, seeking is it's a tricky one, this, because seeking can become, as you've described, Joran, a trap. because you're a slave to the future, right?
Yeah.
When I get this,
Yeah.
I'll be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it can be that, but I think it becomes that when it's running through personality. But seeking doesn't have to be that trap. Seeking can come from beyond personality, and that's what I would call the yearning, and that's what we're discussing here. The deep feeling of like there is something there. You know, nobody could dissuade me of that fact, and I'm trying to find where it is, or why, as I did, why I can experience it, and why do I lose it? That's for me, that was a yearning. So this wasn't a running away into a future or an idea of holiness or any of that bullshit. This was just a very deep seeking that wasn't coming from personality. Yeah, it wasn't a distraction. It was the opposite. It was facing things. It was seeing things. Very different thing. Yeah.